Boogie, 2488, you are being confronted tonight. You are faking your cancer diagnosis, Boogie.
Boogie 2988.
Basically been caught lying about having cancer.
Cancer diagnosis.
Faking cancer.
Boogie, you're fucking lying. I'm sick of this. I can't deal with this anymore. It's so abundantly clear. All right?
Okay.
Come clean. Come clean.
Boogie 9288's history of lying, emotional manipulation, and overall controversy is long and extensive, but this latest round of accusations surrounding Boogie has to be one of the biggest, and if it's true, most disgusting situation any internet personality has ever found themselves in. Accused of faking a cancer diagnosis, Boogie has found himself in a deep hole, and when you dig deeper into the situation, it gets even worse. With Boogie's history of almost weaponizing his cancer diagnosis anytime he finds himself being held accountable for his actions. Most recently with the backlash the creator faced with his latest Bitcoin scheme, Boogie's defense of this whole issue centers around 2 points. First, his ignorance, and second, his need of money for treatment for his cancer, effectively using his alleged cancer diagnosis as a get-out-of-free card.
But actually giving back the $5K you're going to be making back to the community?
No, I'm going to pay my medical bills. That's anybody that's disappointed with that. I have an $1,100 medication, plus a $300 medication. I get a bunch of I'm going to buy medicine with it, man. And if people are disappointed with that, I fully understand that. It's a shitty thing to do, and I'm a shitty person for doing it.
But what type of cancer does Boogie have? And in fact, does he even have cancer? Well, if you were like me and you found yourself extremely confused by the medical jargon that was getting thrown around on the latest episode of the Lol Call Live show, where this whole disaster unfolded, then you're in luck. In today's video, I hope to decipher this whole mess and come up with some kind of conclusion, but of course I have to point out that these are just my opinions and my research. Any medical conclusions will be made in general, as I am obviously not one of Boogie's 3 current doctors. Part 1. The Smoking Gun. At the heart of these accusations are 2 medical terms, secondary polycythemia and polycythemia vera. Now the word polycythemia in of itself is pretty simple to understand. Much like many of the other medical terms you can find in medical textbooks or on the internet, the origin of the word is Latin. Poly meaning plenty or many, cyte stands for cells, and the emia suffix of the word refers to blood, so basically increased blood cells. Polycythemia is a general medical term that indicates a blood disorder with an increase in the production of the red blood cells of the body, and it's a laboratory diagnosis that is often made after a CBC or a complete blood sample is obtained. Now, in order to make the diagnosis of polycythemia, in the blood sample, hemoglobin, hematocrit, and red blood cells levels have to be elevated. Once polycythemia is diagnosed, a cause then has to be investigated, which is where the confusion of secondary polycythemia versus polycythemia vera occurs. During the Lol Cow episode, Destiny came out with the accusation that Boogie has secondary polycythemia, while Boogie himself maintained that he has the cancerous version of this condition known as polycythemia vera.
Boogie, 2488, you are being confronted tonight.
Go ahead.
I am 99% sure that you are faking.
No, don't move.
You are faking your cancer diagnosis, Boogie. Or did he ever say the word cancer?
He said polycythemia vera, which is a form of cancer, as he explained it to me. And no, it is not secondary polycythemia.
So I think it is secondary polycythemia.
And the distinction between these 2 conditions is pretty important, since, one of them has the word cancer attached to it. To better understand the difference between these 2 conditions, we have to dive a little bit into the biology of the human body, and we can start with the red blood cells, which are produced in the bone marrow by a specialized type of cells known as the hematopoietic stem cells. These cells function to produce red blood cells under the influence of a hormone known as erythropoietin. So now that we know that polycythemia is basically a problem of increased red blood cell production, and we understand the 2 key influencers of that production, that being the hormone erythropoietin and the specialized cells of the bone marrow, we can apply this knowledge to the 2 conditions Boogie and Destiny argued for. In secondary primary polycythemia, the problem is with the erythropoietin hormone production. Patients with this condition have an increase in the production of this hormone, which directly results into an increase in the production of the red blood cells, hence the secondary name, as the elevated levels of the cells is secondary to the rise of the stimulating hormone. Medical causes which are known to cause secondary polycythemia include but are not limited to obesity, hypertension, diabetes, the use of external hormone, mainly testosterone, as well as steroids, and of course obstructive sleep apnea. All conditions which, to my knowledge, Boogie is currently diagnosed with, or he's most likely to be diagnosed with. This condition, while being very serious, it's not cancer. In the case of polycythemia vera, or as it's also known as primary polycythemia, the problem is found in the center of production of the red blood cells of the body, and that is the bone marrow. The specialized bone marrow cells undergo increased division and mutation due to the underregulation of a specific enzyme known as the Janus kinase 2 enzyme, which is responsible for controlling their division. Which is why when Boogie goes on to say that his physician has ordered a bone marrow test to confirm the diagnosis of polycythemia vera, well, it makes sense.
Biopsy to confirm it.
Well, if you ordered a bone marrow biopsy to confirm it, it would be weird that you told us that you already had a diagnosis and a confirmation.
Because the markers are in my blood. The hormone markers are in my blood, Destiny.
Perfect. But you said that you had received the diagnosis, but now you just told me you got a bone marrow biopsy.
It's a diagnosis, and now we're confirming. It's called a confirmation. The hormone markers are already in my blood.
Yep. So I think
we are confirming it with the biopsy.
Because in theory, a sample taken directly from the bone marrow would allow for definitive differentiation between the two conditions. If the specialized cells are found to be defective, this means the issue is within the bone marrow and not simply secondary to other conditions that influence the increase of erythropoietin hormone and subsequently the production of red blood cells outside of the bone marrow. All of this, however, is easier said than done. The problem lies in the fact that a bone marrow biopsy is a highly specialized procedure that is not commonly done. It involves removing a sample of the bone marrow, which can only be found inside of large bones of the body, and sending it for examination by a specialized pathologist. And if all of this sounds expensive to you, it's because it is. The average cost I could find for this procedure in the United States is anywhere from $7,000 to $9,000, which is admittedly a lot of money. And this brings us to the next topic of discussion. In the Lol Call episode, Boogie refers to the bone marrow test as being a confirmation for the diagnosis which he has already received. So then the question is, well, do you need a bone marrow to confirm polycythemia vera? Or in other words, if Boogie hasn't yet had the biopsy done, how does he or the doctor treating him know he has the cancerous version of polycythemia? Question mark. And my argument here is that they don't. And this here, of course, is just my opinion. I repeat, it's my opinion based on the research I did. I'm in no way treating Boogie for anything, so I can't make judgment in that way, but I'm basing my opinion, repeat, my opinion, on the research I found. And it all comes down to the medical guidelines I found, which and of course are available for anyone to read, and are linked down in the description. Let me explain. The key to dismantling Boogie's web of lies, ironically, lies in the medical guidelines of polycythemia vera. Now, in most complex conditions, there are medical guidelines which are produced by the WHO organization. The WHO abbreviation, of course, stands for the World Health Organization. These guidelines function as a roadmap that helps physicians worldwide in diagnosing complex medical conditions, and polycythemia vera is no different. In the 2016 official WHO guidelines, a criteria must be met in order for any self-respecting doctor to confidently call polycythemia as polycythemia vera, or basically cancer. And when you look at this criteria, you start to understand that Boogie is most likely lying. In order for a patient with increased red blood cells to be diagnosed as having polycythemia vera, he must meet all three of the major criteria presented by the World Health Organization, or two of the first major criteria plus the minor criteria. And I know that sounds a lot like it's complicated, but it's actually way simpler than you think. The major criteria includes increased red cell volume, either of hemoglobin or hemocrit, or other evidence of increased red cells volume. Second criteria criteria is a bone marrow biopsy, and the third one being a JAK2 mutation, while the minor criteria requires serum erythropoietin level, which is the hormone we already discussed. And as you can see here, diagnosis requires meeting either all three major criteria or the first two major criteria as well as the minor one, which means Boogie 9288 has to have a complete blood sample that shows an elevation of either hemoglobin or hemocratic level, something which I'm sure Boogie has already done probably several times. Since this test is very easy and cheap to do, it's basically a CBC, and I'm sure you've had one done recently too. As well as a bone marrow biopsy, something which Boogie has admitted to not yet doing. Thus, Boogie 9288, by the definition of the World Health Organization, does not have polycythemia vera. Even if we included the minor criteria, Boogie would still fail to meet the definitive diagnosis criteria, because he would still need to meet the first major ones, which include, of course, a bone marrow sample. And this is exactly why I feel like Boogie turned down $50,000 in return of showing his medical records, not because they're personal to him or for privacy reasons, but because in theory his medical records would not, and honestly should not, include the diagnosis of polycythemia vera. And now I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think Keemstar's theory is probably right. Boogie was probably informed that one of the differential diagnoses for his condition is polycythemia vera, as doctors have the right to discuss their potential diagnoses with their patients. But Boogie jumped the gun and announced it to everyone while failing to mention the potential part of the diagnosis, probably as a play for more sympathy, which if it's true, then honestly I have nothing else to say other than shame on you, Boogie.
Well, you remember about 3 weeks back I said that I likely could potentially have a form of cancer? Turns out I got a rare blood cancer called polycythemia vera, which basically makes your body produce too many red blood cells. And when I started taking that testosterone supplement 7 or 8 years ago, however long it's been, we knew that this was a possibility. You never think you're going to be the guy who gets that side effect though, right? You never think it's going to be you. But sometimes it is. It has to be somebody.
Part 2, Conclusion. Boogie 9288 has been given more chances than I can count or detail in this one video, but his decision to come out as a cancer patient, demanding sympathy and money from his followers, all the while refusing to confirm his diagnosis, is honestly unfair and disrespectful for everyone who suffers from this deadly disease. Millions of people suffer in silence, and often they die due to not having access to the medical care they need, unable to obtain life-saving measures because of their lack of money, only for someone like Boogie, an ex-millionaire, who not only mocks cancer by calling it the easiest cancer to get, but takes every opportunity to milk every single advantage he can from it, all without suffering a single ounce of the consequences associated with cancer. His attempt to martyr himself in the process as some kind of hero, who is unjustly facing criticism for choosing to share his struggles with his quote-unquote fans, is equally disgusting.
Milk sympathy from the internet,
Yep.
saying you have all these diseases and whatnot, and
Yep.
not prove it. You shouldn't be able to do that.
Okay. Well,
That's wrong.
well then
You've been doing that for 2 years.
let that lesson be. If you were ever to talk about your cancer
Keith.
moving forward, you have to tweak the
Keith,
proof.
That is so wrong. He's been
Let the
doing this
lesson
for
let
2
my
years.
let my lesson prove that if you're going to talk about your health problems online, you have to prove it.
Good. You know what?
Yeah.
Boogie did not only choose to make this public, but he actively benefited from it, both in money and in support. And because he made it public by his choice, he gave up his ability to now suddenly keep it private. It doesn't work that way, Boogie. You should have learned by now you can't have your cake and eat it too, and if anyone should know about cakes, it's definitely you.